Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the West Michigan Cloud Security Alliance, Not Another Demo. We're joined this week by some folks from Semperis, and as always, myself, Matt Nelson, president of the West Michigan CSA, and joined again by Mr. Anthony Coggins from Acrisure here in Grand Rapids. So Semperis folks, I'm going to let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, and we will take it from there.
Hi, my name is Holly Adams. I am the account executive for Semperis, and I've spent 11 years in software sales in the Midwest, 10 years selling for Quest software, and 1 year selling for StealthFits. And I've been with Semperis for 4 weeks.
Very good.
I'm Kirk Lashbrook. I am a longtime Active Directory and security architect. I am a solution architect with Semperis.
And Kirk failed to mention that he's over in Eastern Michigan. He's in Detroit, Royal Oak.
Yep.
My name is Sean Deuby. I'm Director of Services for Semperis. I am a born and raised Michigander and an honorary 616 area code person because I've got one brother that lives in Jenison and my other brother lives in Ada, just down the street from Amway, Matt.
Oh, yeah. No, I know that area very well.
I've spent many fantastic vacations on Michigan's West Coast, although it's been a long time. I'm in Plano, Texas right now. So,
oh wow,
my background is 15 years with Texas Instruments. So I rolled out NT4, NT35 and 351 around the world, and then Intel, and I was one of Intel's original Active Directory architects, and then ran it for 10 years. And then I did a stint for 4 years as a technology journalist for Windows IT Pro. And I actually, back then, I interviewed Jim Rivas back when the Cloud Security Alliance was just getting started.
Yeah.
So I've got a fond background with the CSA. And before joining Semperis, the hybrid stuff. I worked for Agile. I was one of the leads for Microsoft Cloud Services and Cloud Integration for Agile before coming back to home territory for AD. So,
oh, fantastic! Yeah, I appreciate that, guys. So, I'm gonna start with I think a simple question. So, I have heard Semperis and Semperis and Semperis. There's like 3 or 4 different ways that I've heard the company named. So, what's the official stance on the company pronunciation?
I guess what I would say, as long as you can find the website, we don't care. But historically, I mean, it depends on how long you've been with a company. The company got started in Israel, and where they say Semperis.
Okay.
And now we still have a Tel Aviv office with most of our developers, and but we have a large U.S. presence. And we just since we've been in the U.S., people have a hard time getting the emphasis on the right syllable, right? So we just, if you say Semperis, well, that's fine.
Works. All right, you guys will answer to all of the above.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I believe we are going to talk a lot today about Active Directory and Active Directory backup and recovery and forest level recovery. And, that's a world I've spent a good 20 years back when I had real work to do in that space. So this is going to be a really fun one, I think, today. I always start off with this same question, and I think it's really the premise of what we're trying to accomplish here with the Not Another Demo series, and that is, every single person inside of security and inside of IT has got, a full schedule. There are constantly vendors that are knocking on everyone's door, trying to get meetings, trying to do stuff. So talk to our audience about why would they want to take or why should they take a meeting with you guys?
I guess the way I would approach that, I would say it's the same reason that I actually came to Semperis in the first place, from doing a wide variety of things in the business. And that there's a deep, dark secret, maybe it's not quite so dark anymore, about Active Directory. And everybody that has been an Active Directory administrator for any time and any depth knows that secret. It is the thing that keeps AD people up at night. And that's the fact that if things go really, really, really bad with AD, it's really difficult to recover. And it's so difficult to recover. There's a complicated, convoluted white paper or recovery process that is way more difficult than most people think. In my experience, and this is from, running Intel's AD, you look at this and you go, people follow some procedures. They look at the Microsoft document and they go, whoa, okay, I'll keep that for future reference. And then if they're good, they'll take that document and they'll sort of customize it to their environment. And then many fewer ones actually try to do something with it. And then the very, very smallest percentage actually do something about it on a regular basis. Because historically, AD never went so bad that you ever had to worry about it. It was a risk, but it's a very small risk. Yeah. But what's happened, that's the scenario where the schema goes bad, or something like that happens, which is very, very, very rare, as we've come to realize. But what's happened is malware, denial of availability malware, ransomware, and wiperware that can flatten your AD literally in minutes, and flatten all of it. And suddenly you find yourself in a full-on disaster recovery, forest recovery process that that I believe most companies are not prepared for. And that's speaking from my experience, and I can't speak for Kirk, but I know Kirk's felt the same way, as an AD administrator of many years. It's just really difficult, and everyone sort of pushed it under the tables, but now you can't afford to push it under the table because of ransomware.
So I remember back when I was an Active Directory administrator and was trying to get things, accomplished through management or approval processes. And I always wanted to print that Microsoft manual out of how to do the Active Directory forest recovery, but I felt bad for trees. And so I never printed that thing out because it was literally like 400 pages long. So, so let's dive in a little bit deeper then in terms of, because that's end of the world story, right? AD is gone, and so we have to recover it. And we'll dive deeper into how you guys can handle that situation. Talk a little bit about like day-to-day functionality, things that you guys can be used for in terms of, managing, maintaining Active Directory.
Sure. Obviously, what AD is a directory of everything that is going on the network as far as authentication and access control. And there are a lot of changes that are made to AD on a regular basis, whether they're automatic changes or whether they're user changes, administrator changes, and all that. And historically, it takes a lot to keep up with those changes, to understand what's happening with the changes, to interpret those changes. And if something happens in a change that you don't want, even if you can see it, it's very difficult to roll things back, to bring things back from the way they were. A great example, I talked to a customer not so long ago, and service accounts, so a service account password is a situation either everybody knows a service account password because it's been around for 10 or 15 years and everyone's afraid to change it, or nobody knows what it is and they're afraid to change it because it'll break your SQL Server cluster and it'll be hard to get back. Number one, it's a security issue. And number two, if you have that happen, you're looking at a big outage. So one of the things that we do in monitoring AD is we give you the ability to immediately roll back any changes that are made to AD objects or attributes, because we track all of them. If depending on how much of an AD person you are, at a very high level, we have two products, and this is the monitoring product called Directory Services Protector. What we do is we ingest your AD into a SQL Server database. And then with that database, we then track changes of everything that happens to AD in that SQL Server database. We also look at the security event log, and specifically those event IDs that are changes to Active Directory. And we pull that into SQL Server, correlate the two, and show it on a console. So then what that means is that you can see everything that is changed in Active Directory, because we essentially tap into the replication stream. So everything that an Active Directory domain controller sees, we see. It's almost like we have our own little RODC. And then we correlate it with the event log to see who made the changes. And that gives us the ability, since we have all the information about it, to roll it back with a mouse click, or even automatically if you choose to do so. So that takes care of the changes, and we also have the ability to analyze for security vulnerabilities, indicators of weaknesses, indicators of compromise at the same time with AD.
So you're able to detect things like golden ticket attacks and things of that nature?
Yeah, so we'll see things like that. We have the ability, for example, one of the things that we're good at is looking at DC shadow attacks, if you're familiar with the AD DC shadow attack. Yeah. For the people that are watching this that have never seen DC shadow, essentially what it does, it allows an attacker that has gotten domain administrator or domain dominance, it allows them to take the computer that they're on, use Mimikatz, and inject changes into Active Directory as a domain controller. Essentially, it programmatically promotes the host to be a domain controller, injects whatever changes you want, and then demotes it immediately. But because that's a normal operation for Active Directory, that doesn't show up in the event logs. But because we're actually monitoring directory replication, we see those changes being made in the configuration container, and we can also see a footprint of the computer that has done the DC shadow attack because of some characteristics it has.
Very nice. And that's part of the monitor. So you have a monitor and a backup suite. Is that
correct?
What I'm getting at, or what I'm
right? One is I would call it, it's a monitor and security configurator. So you pull it up and it shows you about 20 right now, about 20 different indicators of weaknesses, potential misconfigurations that may compromise your Active Directory, and then also indicators that show indeed something has happened. Someone has logged into administrator in the last 2 weeks, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Great. So to the, since Breg's not here, I guess I'll ask a couple hard questions.
Have at it.
So to the backup portion of your software, starting in Server 2012 R2, you're able to enable something called AD Recycle Bin. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. And then another great backup software that a lot of very large enterprises use is Veeam. Both of these kind of go hand in hand to help with AD object restorations, things of that nature. So what do you say to people who are going to ask you, why do I need to buy your backup software when I have either Veeam and or AD Recycle Bin enabled?
Sure. Well, so there's sort of two questions on this. One is, if you have Recycle Bin, why would you want something like Directory Services Protector? And the other is to the backup. And I'll talk about the Recycle Bin, and maybe Kirk, if you want to talk about the differences in backups. So the Recycle Bin tracks deleted objects, which is great, and we all were so thankful for when that showed up. What it doesn't track are attribute changes to objects. So if somebody changes the password hash, if somebody makes a change to the configuration container, maybe they delete 80 subnets or something like that. It only handles that one circumstance of a deleted object. Directory Services Protector, DSP, handles any changes that are made to the object, basically, and shows you in great detail what has changed, who changed it. In addition, not just security principles. It monitors group policy as well. So you can see changes to group policy. For example, if a bad guy changes the default password policy, you can see it, you can compare it to the previous version, and with a couple of clicks, you can automatically revert it. So a broad scope of rollback capabilities.
And those rollback capabilities kick off like replication and all of that to get those changes spread around everywhere right away.
Yeah, there's actually a dialog box that by default, where the checkboxes are checked, that says forced replication. And if the object that you're working on is a container like an OU, also operate against all the objects in the OU. For example, if somebody deletes an OU, it'll restore the OU, restore all the users or whatever objects are in it, and force replication across the network immediately.
Yeah, nice. Anthony, you're still living in the real world. I have some horror stories of group policies gone awry back when I was in the trenches. So, I mean, any juicy stories you want to share?
I mean, I have.
Honestly,
yeah, no, we've had, just from working years with, AD and group policy with, perhaps an organization where it was hard to carve out segmented permissions to, sub-OUs, and perhaps an overarching group policy that applied to the whole domain was changed because this user thought they were only changing, their OU.
Right.
Luckily, we had probably one, I don't know if they're a direct competitor of yours, but we had Stealth Bits at the time that alerted us to this change. But we weren't able to, roll it back with a click of a button. I had to go into that group policy and, basically look and see what it was before and then change it myself.
Can I volunteer? I have my best story or worst story is a group policy story. I won't go on too long, but it's a real hair raiser. So when I was running Intel's Active Directory, me and my team, back in 2003, we were upgrading our Windows 2000 because we deployed Active Directory 3 months after it came out. So we're about to upgrade from 2000 to 2003, and this is about 120 domain controllers. And I tested it. We actually went up to Redmond to the customer lab in Redmond and did an air-gapped upgrade of Intel's AD and all that. Everything worked great. So I'm doing this upgrade on Memorial Day weekend, Friday night of Memorial Day weekend. And I upgrade one domain controller and everything's great. And I upgrade a second domain controller and I'm watching all the indicators and everything's great. And then my buddy, who's now an architect for Mass Mutual, calls me up and he says, I just got a password prompt for my Exchange email. And I had gotten that too. And I thought, well, that's odd. Why would I get that? So just on a hunch, I called the Worldwide Command Center and they said, oh, Sean, we're glad you called. Intel's factory is on a crisis bridge. Let me drop you into it. And boom, I got dropped into the crisis bridge for all of Intel's microprocessor fabs saying, our users can't log in the Americas domain. Mm-hmm. What did you do and undo it? And of course, I'm like, I don't know what the hell happened. And oops, am I allowed to say that? Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And how do you roll back an AD upgrade? So to summarize 8 hours of the most gut-churning angst you can think of, group policy had a problem. Sysvol had a problem between Sysvol on disk and Sysvol in Active Directory. And group policy had reverted the password lifetime from what Intel had said at 42 days to 90 days. I'm sorry, the other way around, from 90 days to 42 days. So what happened is I instantly expired 30,000 users into Intel's America domain.
Very nice.
So,
no issues for the help desk there at all, 30,000.
Well, I finally figured out what it was and reverted. But ever since then, I talk about people fixing problems, and it said to get the real world scenario, you have to have a crisis bridge of managers shouting on the phone while you're trying to figure it out.
So I still want to go to Kirk on the question about other backups, but but before we do that, to kind of follow up on what Anthony was talking about there, what about stopping changes from happening in the first place? So if we go all the way to the front end of this, you know, like domain admin, group membership, and other things, are you guys able to, you know, put some auditing, either auto rollback or even put some protection or anything like that on things that you don't want to have changed? Is there any functionality along those lines?
Exactly. You can set up a notification for any object in Active Directory, any DN, and if something changes, you can trigger an auto revert. So you can monitor the domain admins group. Someone gets added, you can have it set up so that it's automatically removed. Come in the next day or overnight and address it and approve it and take action on it. So it's fully automated. Very simple way to, you know, capture and prevent those types of unauthorized changes to any object in Active Directory, not just groups.
Because I am a firm proponent on stopping bad stuff from happening versus recovering from bad stuff happening. So I like that. I like that functionality a lot. So Kirk, back to Anthony's question about, say, a Veeam or some other sort of
backups,
backup type scenario. What are some benefits?
I think Matt froze, so go ahead.
I froze, but we know what the question is. So.
Yeah. So not specific to Veeam, but a lot of those, you know, types of traditional Active Directory backup, all of that is fully automated. So you don't have to, you know, use all those resources, all those technical resources to do all those steps that are required on HDC. Especially helpful in multi-domain forests where you have child domains or large environments. You know, if you have more than 2 domain controllers, you're not going to rely on those system state or snapshot type of recovery effort. You know, simply very challenging. Microsoft highly recommends against doing any type of snapshot type recovery of a forest, especially if you have more than 2 domain controllers. You know, our product will get the global catalog up and running in a clean state, validate it, make sure all the users can authenticate. Fully automated, you don't have to do any of that work.
So
It's like magic.
I wish I could do a backup and recovery of my internet connection, which seemed to have just done a little flake out there. So hopefully everything's still recorded. If not, it sounded like there were some definite high points there. Anthony, I missed some of that because I went dark, but
And then
sufficient answer?
And a little more on recycle bin too. You know, our product will, DSP, our Directory Services Protector, it'll fully work regardless if you have the recycle bin enabled or not. There's no dependencies on that. You know, recycle bin can be a little bit cumbersome, especially if someone, you know, makes changes to 5,000 user objects or changes the employee ID number to, you know, half the company, those types of, you know, wide scale mistakes. So you can capture all that with DSP and then roll it back immediately with very minimal effort. You don't have to mount a backup. You don't have to search for an offline DIT file that, you know, who knows where it was stored or where, you know, what day. It's all done in real time. So 10 seconds, you can revert any type of Active Directory change compared to, you know, potentially an hour or 2.
Yeah. So that's great. So in my own even experience, where the decommissioning of an Exchange server went very awry and all the AD objects in the forest were deleted, yeah, that's a story for another time.
That counts as a bad day.
So you're telling me that with your product, I could have restored all those with the attributes, because what had happened was I was able to restore all those using some antiquated built-in AD Explorer.
AD Explorer, yeah.
Those out. It was super fun. But all the attributes, all the group memberships, everything was gone, which had to be populated by hand. So you're telling me that your product would just handle that all as well?
Absolutely. So like a real world example, someone deletes an OU with 500 user objects, and all those user objects are in groups that are also in that OU. We can recover that entire OU, all the child objects, all the users, all the groups, and then the group memberships will also be completely identical to, you know, prior to the deletion. So very clean. Most importantly, fast. You know, get to the root cause of a problem, solve it faster. That's what our tools really help with.
Great.
Nice. So another area of vendor products that sometimes is a pet peeve of mine is when they become an island to themselves and do not work well in the security and or IT ecosphere that organizations have. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe API abilities or other things that you have to say, connect into a SIM, forward events, changes, that sort of thing, just how well that you guys operate inside of the larger security ecosphere?
Sure. So Directory Services Protector, we call it DSP, fully integrates with any SIM and supports the syslog format. You can send all your changes, all your AD replication objects, attribute type changes to your SIM. What I find helpful, especially in a large enterprise, you can filter it. You don't have to send every single type of change. You can specify only send groups, only send users, only send deletions, the operations. So very granular, up to you. It really helps if you have a, oversubscribed SIM or, cost is a concern where you may not want to send, all of those Active Directory changes, but flexible, up to you to meet your requirements.
Yeah, that's Go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to say, in the latest version of our product, we have the ability to write certain events into the event log. So into our own Semperis event log. So if you have a SIEM that is scraping the event log, if, for example, somebody adds themselves to the domain administrators group, and you've got a notification written for that, you can automatically roll back, write something to the event log that the SIEM will then pull from the event log, and you can flag it for further.
So it can pull natively from the Windows event log rather than needing another connection into it from.
Right.
Very cool.
I like the ability to sort and maybe only send relevant information to the though, because I remember my last AD job, one of the last things I had to do was connect, was like integrate Active Directory and to a SIM, and within minutes I had like 100 million lines of logs, and I was like, well, what am I ever possibly going to do with this? Like, there's no way we can filter all of that out. And like you said, especially in situations where maybe you're being charged per amount of data that's going into that SIM, might as well send smarter data there than just sending everything.
Exactly. Yep.
And going to charge, I think that's a good segue to asking what your pricing model is. Do you guys price by, unit or object protected, or per warm belly button, is a lot of people call it?
I've not heard it described before as warm belly button, but yeah, so we prefer to say heartbeat.
Heartbeat, got it.
We charge per human. We don't charge for surface accounts. If that human has got a regular account and an administrative account, and an account in other locations and all that, we don't charge for that.
Great.
We charge per human.
Per belly button, apparently. Unless somebody has two, in which case then they should probably be double licensed, honestly. So then again, maybe in just a little more detail, explain the differences between the two products. So if you're getting the one, and then what's the functionality in between the two, I guess.
And can you get one without the other?
Yes, you can get one without the other. We find that most customers tend to get both, but not always. So the one product that we've been talking about just now is DSP, or Directory Services Protector. And that is the real-time object and attribute tracking and rollback and security mechanism solution. And the other is ADFR, Active Directory Forest Recovery, which is the fully automated, fully orchestrated forest recovery product. In case you have a situation that requires not only a full forest recovery, but we also do a partition recovery. So, it's along the continuum of things along the continuum of having a bad day. You could potentially have something go so bad in a partition that it's just too much trouble to recover correctly. And so ADFR will allow you to do an authoritative recovery of a directory partition. If it's a DNS partition, a configuration partition, the domain partition. And because what it's doing is an authoritative restore on one DC, the partition never becomes unavailable. One DC in the partition temporarily becomes unavailable. The recovery is done, and then all the changes flow out. And then finally, we also do a non-authoritative a non-authoritative restore of a domain controller, which is quick and easy. A lot of organizations have their own processes for doing it because it's not that uncommon. But we go all three aspects of it. And I still have my one slide that I have to show in my.
Yeah, feel free to pull it up, because the one area that we haven't, and being that we're the Cloud Security Alliance, we haven't really touched on Azure yet. So, but feel free to pull up your slide, and then maybe we can just talk a little bit about replication from on-prem AD out to Azure, and then the sorts of problems that can happen there, and maybe how you guys can assist with companies that are heavily invested in Azure AD as well.
Sure. So our one slide here is sort of a thumbnail overview if you are not familiar with what it takes to actually do a full forest recovery in Active Directory. This is a highly simplified view of the process of what it takes to recover AD. So you see 28 steps. In the first column, you'll see that for every domain that you have, and if you have 3, 4, 5 domains, you have to perform all of those steps for each domain. And off to the right, you'll see that for every domain controller you have to perform all of these steps. All of this has to be done in the right order. And there are about 5 places in here where if you don't get it right, you have to start from scratch. For example, if you look at step 5, step 5 is what you're doing in a forest recovery is you're building out a seed forest that is a good forest and is a working forest that doesn't have any malware, anything like that. Well, as Kirk was talking about, one of the things that makes Active Directory forest recovery unique is that we have a patented process that only backs up the Active Directory service. It does not back up the operating system. So as security people, I'm sure when somebody gets a malware attack, or a ransomware or a wiperware attack, the malware has already been resident on the OS for days or weeks or even months. They wait for the right time to do it. So the most recent backup that you'll want to recover AD for almost certainly has the malware sitting on it if you're doing a system state recovery or a bare metal restore. The ADFR backup only backs up the DIT, the logs, the sysvol, and some registry hives that are necessary to reinstall Active Directory, recover it on a member server. So it does not restore OS resident malware when you execute this restore. So that's kind of a thumbnail overview. I mean, there's a lot more detail, and we could get into on this if you want, but from a high level viewpoint, what ADFR does is it automates all of this, as Kirk said, with like 6 clicks, and it will take care of all of this for you. One of the popular use cases for this product, again, if you're a longtime AD administrator, you will totally recognize this, is how hard it is to build a lab environment. You have to take a domain controller out of production. You have to clean up production. You've got to put it in an isolated network. You have to do all these operations on a domain controller to make it workable by itself, separate from production. Yeah. And so as a result, it's not done very often, if it's done at all. With ADFR, you can take an Active Directory forest backup, bring it into a lab environment, recreate an ADFR server, and recover the environment in minutes, literally. So you could have a 100 domain controller environment, and you could restore it to 2 domain controllers in the lab environment, and it's fully automated. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I actually was tapped to have that project at one point in my life. And we called it the Bubble, and I was referred to as the Bubble Boy for all of the hours that I spent trying to keep separate Active Directory copy up and running. So being able to do that and run some testing, and important for people to think of having, a good lab of your AD application development is a big one, make it be as real world to your environment as possible. Right. So
Yeah.
another great feature.
So to your Azure AD question.
Yep.
So yeah, so in a hybrid environment, of course, what you have, Azure AD consists of identities that are sourced from on-premises, from Active Directory on-premises,
Yep.
and are also in Azure AD alone and in the cloud. At this point, what ADFR and DSP manage just on premises, but our 3.1 version, which we're targeting for the end of the year, will also be able to manage changes to Active Directory, to Azure Active Directory as well. So to be able to holistically look at one Active Directory, whether it's an on-premises identity or whether it's an in the cloud identity, to be able to look at both both environments and be able to perform similar capabilities in both environments.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Just looking at this list here of doing a forest recovery is frightening.
Well,
I mean, if you look at just the first one, right? If you're any sort of a sizable organization that has lots of domain controllers scattered around, that part alone might be difficult. So
I'm a student of the Maersk scenario because, for those of you that are not familiar with it, Maersk was hit as collateral damage between a war between Russia and Ukraine, and they got accidentally infected. And by the way, hundreds of other companies got infected and wiped flat with NotPetya. And the things that they went through, I have a couple of links, I could even put it in the chat, of great articles about in detail what happened with NotPetya, including the identity subject matter expert from Maersk wrote a long blog post about 2 weeks ago to give more information about it. But when they finally got Active Directory back up and running, when they got their first DC back up and running, it encrypted 146 of 147 domain controllers. They had one offline branch office in Ghana that was offline because there was a power failure. They collected the hard drives from that one remaining domain controller, got them back up to England on a Gulfstream G450 jet, and started rebuilding AD out of that. The first domain controller in their seed forest was a Surface Pro SP4. Then they had to build out the
domain controller these days. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. They had to build it out then they had to build out their seed forest around the world. They would build IFM packages, step 21 there. And then they had to get those IFM packages to the domain controllers to the servers, they weren't DCs yet, around the world. That's step 24. They went to Microsoft offices and other big company offices and asked, can we use your fast network to move these multi-gig packages to where they need to go? They had a Maersk employee run up to the Microsoft office, copy the IFM package locally, and then run it over to their office so they could make the domain controllers. I mean, this stuff is just crazy. You can't make this up.
Yeah, yeah. You wouldn't want to make it up.
No, because the logistics of it are massive to make this work in the right order. While the CXOs are running around with their hair on fire, yelling at you, when's it going to be done? When's it going to be done?
Yeah. And for those of us, I think, that have spent any amount of time in that world, we've had those situations. Again, I know I've had several of them where I've had the person standing over my shoulder asking me when AD was going to be happy and healthy again. And it's a slow process if you don't have something in place, right? So
that's right.
So I guess just to kind of wrap things up, let's hit some high notes again of, like if I circle all the way back around to, why would someone take some time or spend some time with Semperis? So if you're if you're concerned about Active Directory, I guess if you have Active Directory, which I think is everyone or pretty much everyone, if you're from a day-to-day perspective, if you're concerned about changes that are happening to group policy, group objects, anything like that. And then from a larger scale, if you are concerned about the overall health and ability to recover from any sort of disaster, am I missing some things there?
No, I think that's a good summary. I think an important point, people tend to get distracted by the cloud because of the dominance that, especially since COVID, the dominance that it has in our mind share. But the reality is, as you said, Matt, 90+% of organizations, years ago, 90+% of organizations over 500 seats use Active Directory, or it's their core identity platform. And now with cloud, in a hybrid environment, which everybody has, that's projecting your on-premises identities, which is Active Directory, into the cloud. So AD is now more important. It may not be as sexy as some of the cloud things that people are focusing on, but if anything, it's more important now than it ever was, and it's more vulnerable than it ever was, given what's happening.
Yeah, if you think of all the companies that are utilizing SaaS applications, 10, 15 years ago, maybe you had a lot of on-prem applications that had their own, maybe had their own logins that weren't AD connected. I think it's pretty, and Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's pretty hard to find an application that's not Active Directory connected at this point.
At the very least, SAML, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of talk and a lot of work around, for example, Azure AD conditional access and all the power that conditional access has. It's fantastic. But if somebody gets in on a weak password in your Active Directory and they own your Active Directory on-premises environment, conditional access doesn't matter.
Yep, exactly. Good stuff. Well, we're at about our time. So to the audience out there that's watching, again, if you are concerned about your Active Directory, actually, if you're not concerned about your Active Directory, we should probably have a different conversation. But if you are concerned about your Active Directory environment, Semperis, they'll respond to anything, apparently. So, we'll make sure that we have you guys' contact information when we upload this. Folks that are watching, please like, subscribe, do all the fun YouTube stuff. Sean, Kirk, Holly, I really appreciate you guys doing this. I think this was another great conversation. I love just having these real conversations. I think it's a total game changer in a space that needs some game changing. So appreciate you guys doing this. And yeah, with that, we'll see everybody in episode 6.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Anthony,
Great talk.